I think there are good news and bad news. Let me start with the bad news so that we get that out of the way. I hate to tell you that the danger of a global nuclear war has probably never been closer than right now. Because, there are several crisis spots which have the potential to develop from a regional conflict into a global conflict. And one of them naturally is the situation in Ukraine, where despite the back and forth hopeful signs and not so hopeful signs coming from the discussion between President Trump and President Putin, there is unfortunately very strong pressure coming from the so-called coalition of the willing, that is the three Europeans in particular, Starmer from Great Britain, France, Macron, and Germany, Merz, and some others around them, like the Baltic dwarfs, which are not so big, but nevertheless very vocal in not wanting to end the war, which is really a war of NATO against Russia. They want to have a strategic defeat of Russia. This is the expressed desire. And that is not possible because you cannot defeat the strongest nuclear power because Russia will absolutely not give up the right for defending the Russian Federation territory. As a matter of fact, as the Ukraine war continued now for 3.5 years or more already now, the Russians, Putin in particular, changed the Russian nuclear doctrine because they always had a doctrine which said that Russia will only use nuclear weapons when the existence of the Russian Federation is threatened. Now, they changed that a good year ago in saying that they will keep the right to use nuclear weapons first, even if the existence of the Russian Federation is threatened by a non-nuclear state, which, however, is backed by a nuclear power. And that description naturally fits entirely Ukraine. Now, the people who are pushing the strategic defeat of Russia are playing with fire because the idea, every military expert I have listened to and whose writings I have studied is agreeing that on the battlefield, the Ukraine war is as good as lost. It is also clear that the strategic aim of Russia never was to occupy the entire territory of Ukraine, but only to liberate those areas where the population is predominantly Russia-speaking, that is the Donbass, the Crimea. And, it is very clear that Russia is now in the final phase before concluding the liberation of those Russian-speaking areas. And there is absolutely no sign that they have the intention to occupy anything beyond that. So naturally, the war could come to an end, if there would be an agreement to start serious peace negotiations, not just a ceasefire, but actually eliminating what the Russians call the root causes, which is that they do not accept the expansion of NATO up to their border. That is, they will not accept Ukraine in NATO, and they will not accept that there are offensive weapon systems practically operated by NATO countries in the vicinity of Moscow of several minutes, 5 minutes, which is actually a reversed Cuban Missile Crisis. So when now the coalition of the willing are pushing the idea that the Americans should give the Tomahawk cruise missile to Tobi, kannst du mal kommen? Kannst du mal das Bild wegmachen? Das stört mich total. That they should not give the also wenn du weggehst, dann lass mir das Ding hier. If they would give the Tomahawk now to the Ukrainians, that is the United States, which is what the Europeans are demanding, then these weapon systems can only be operated with the military and technical aid by the United States. This would absolutely cross the red line, after which it's everybody's guess, is that the final red line which would cause a Russian reaction? It would probably not be yet the real full nuclear war, but they would probably send a strong message by maybe destroying some NATO bases in Poland, in Romania, or destroying the factories where the Taurus is produced, or where the Tomahawk operated from. With other words, they could send a very strong message to, that this is the crossing of the red line. And then if the Europeans escalate beyond that, you could be in no time, in absolutely no time, in something which could develop into a global nuclear war. And likewise, the situation in the Middle East is unfortunately very far from a ceasefire which is ending the genocide. We see the continuation of the killing going on in Gaza. There is many experts are guessing that Israel, under the leadership of Netanyahu, will make another strike against Iran. Iran, which in all likelihood has maintained and received in the meantime massive support in their air defense from Russia, from China, from basically that they could facilitate a counterstrike, which may put in jeopardy the entire existence of Israel. I mean, that's the opinion of several military experts. And naturally, the fooling around with the one China policy, which unfortunately several European governments are doing right now, also maybe not tomorrow, but in a very short period of time, could go into a larger conflict between the United States and China in the Pacific. Now, we should be really extremely alarmed, because this is more dangerous than the Cuban Missile Crisis. Very simple, for the reason that the offensive weapon systems which are being prepared in Ukraine against Moscow, against Russia, are on a much shorter distance than the Cuban missiles were at the time of the Soviet Union. And, that was already a Cuban Missile Crisis. But you had two people, Khrushchev and Kennedy, who had a red telephone, and they used it a lot. They were talking all the time, and there were back channels, but much more trust. Now there is no trust. Back channels are sometimes here, then they're not, then here, then not. So it's vacillating. So nobody can know, is Trump now talking to Putin? Will there be a summit? Then the summit is called off. This back and forth makes a strategic evaluation very, very difficult and very, very iffy. But we have a reversed Cuban Missile Crisis, with all the armament treaties basically having been unilaterally dismantled from the side of the West. So we are in a extremely dangerous strategic situation. And I can only advise you, if you have not done it yet, at our recent IPC meeting, there was a presentation by the nuclear scientist Ted Postol, who has written many standard books on the difference between nuclear and conventional war. And he gave there a half-hour presentation where he showed what will happen if there is only one nuclear weapon used, in a very short period of time, all weapons will be used. And he insists that, once you start to use nuclear weapons, within 5 days, all of them will be used in a global nuclear war because there will be a continuous escalation. Now, this obviously means that the people living in Germany and, other European countries, they will be the first target, but by no means the only one. I think it's a complete foolish idea if the Americans think that this is a European theater war, because it's very clear that that for a variety of reasons, nuclear weapons would be also sent to American cities. And if you think you are sitting in some place in Africa, Latin America, or Asia, and this is something which only concerns the Europeans, we should remember that at the Bandung Conference in 1955, it was, I think, President Sukarno and also Nehru who warned, who said, if there is ever a nuclear war, it will hit the countries of the global south maybe a few weeks later until the radiation spreads around the globe, but we will hit in the same way, and life on Earth is threatened by the use of nuclear weapons. This is why we absolutely have to have a different system. We have to derail this unbelievable, insane armament drive, which is going on right now in Germany in particular, but also in France, in other European countries, some less, like Spain or the East European, Hungary, Slovakia, Czechia. They fortunately are not in the same mode, but the so-called coalition of the willing countries are in a full-fledged military build-up, and the tone has become warmongering, warmongering, warmongering. So this is something we absolutely have to reverse, because if we don't reverse, it's a short question of time when this will, meet the final red line after which there is no return. So naturally, all of this is driven by the fact that the Western countries who thought that after the end of the Cold War, they would dominate the world in an unipolar world based on the Anglo-American relationship, and they already declared the end of history. This was Francis Fukuyama, who said every country on the planet will adopt the Western liberal system. Well, we know that that was not the case, even if they tried to impose this Westernization with military interventions in Iraq, in Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, many other countries around the world. But it led to an incredible blowback, because the countries of the global south insisted that they do not agree to be westernized in this way, because it's also very clear it goes along with making the oligarchs richer and the poor poorer. So why should anybody in the global south accept such a model? Okay, that's past history. Now there are some very positive signs why I think we should be extremely alarmed, extremely actively mobilized to defeat this, but we should not be desperate, because I think we are in an absolutely winnable situation. Now, obviously, the relationship between the United States and Russia, given the fact that these are the two largest nuclear powers, is the most important. And while it is very difficult to come to a definite judgment, because even President Trump can change his opinion from the one extreme into its opposite within one day, several times back and forth. So you think there is a summit, there's no summit, but nevertheless, there is hope, because between Russia and the United States, both sides have expressed a desire that the option of building the Bering Strait tunnel between Alaska and Siberia is on the table. And I think it's much more on the table than meets the eye. And if the United States and Russia would build the tunnel of about 70 miles between the northern part of the North American continent, Alaska, and the Siberian side, this would open up a completely different trajectory of development, because it would, infrastructure-wise, open up the far east of Russia, of Siberia, where you have an enormous amount of undeveloped raw materials. All minerals, all elements of the periodic table are found there. And if there would be a joint venture of Russia, the United States, China, many countries from the global south who participated in previous Vladivostok economic summits, where the issue of the development of Siberia was always discussed, we could enter a completely different domain. Now, this is being opposed by the Europeans, at least by the coalition of the willing, but it would be in the fundamental interest of countries like Germany, for example, to participate in such a development, because Germany has no raw materials to speak of, and they also have no energy. So, what prevents Germany from participating in such a plan, other than some crazy, insane oligarchical wet dreams that they, can contain Russia and cause Russia to be defeated, which will not ever happen because it's a nuclear power. And it will possibly lead to the end of civilization, but not to the end of Russia. So this is very positive. We immediately, after this news became public, we conducted a seminar, an EER, Executive Intelligence Review seminar, where within 2 to 3 days, we were able to put together a top team of Russian experts, of those Russian experts who have been involved in the Bering Strait Tunnel project for decades. That is Mr. Razbigin, a very prominent Russian deputy head of the SOPS, that is an investment entity between the Russian Academy of Science and the Russian Economic Ministry, and also Mr. Mamedov, who is the deputy CEO of the Russian Direct Investment Fund. That's really the deputy of Kirill Dmitriev, who was in all the summits present. And from the American side, Scott Spencer, who is the chief engineer of the US rail freight company, which would build the Bering Strait Tunnel if the decision is being made. And several other top people like Professor Sevieri, who is a top bridge and tunnel builder from Italy, who completely endorsed this program as well. So we put this on the table, and please take your time to watch this, because it gives you a sense not only what is the economic potential of the building of the Bering Strait Tunnel, but also the feasibility, because we have the top people from the US and the Russian side participating in our seminar. And this is big because, the reason why we are so excited about it is because we published in 2014 an updated version of all our development plan, which we had worked on since the 70s, an Africa development plan, a plan, OASIS plan for the Middle East, Latin American integration plan, Pacific Basin plan, Eurasian land bridge plan, plan to develop America. We updated all of that and called it the new Silk Road becomes the world land bridge. And what that would mean, that once the decision is made to integrate all continents through tunnels and bridges, you can travel in a few years from southern Argentina or southern Chile all the way up Latin America, Central America, North America, Canada, Alaska, through the Bering Tunnel, to the Trans-Siberian Railroad. Then you integrate into the European continental rail net until Portugal. There you go through the tunnel underneath the Strait of Gibraltar. You connect to Northern Africa and you continue to travel by fast train all the way down to the south, to the Cape of Good Hope in Southern Africa. And likewise, if you want to travel from, from the Bering Strait, you go down all the way to through China, Iran. You connect into India, and from there you go to Southeast Asia, and then somewhere at the tip of Malaysia, Singapore, you take a boat and you travel to Indonesia and Australia. Maybe tunnels can be built there, also connecting many of the islands. So soon, if we go this way, we will be all connected through a system of transport all around the world. And that will absolutely demonstrate in practical terms that we are the united one humanity. Pope Leo XIV just a couple of days ago made a beautiful sermon in front of the Jubilee celebration on the St. Peter's place, where he praised Nicolaus of Cues, the great cardinal and scientist of the 15th century. And, this is extremely important for all of you. I mean, the Pope said Cardinal Nicolaus of Cues, unfortunately, is still very little known. But he is very important because he developed a conception called the coincidence of opposites. Now, when we heard this, especially when I heard this, I jumped 2 meters high. And believe me, I can, with joy, I can jump 2 meters high, maybe not every day, but when such extraordinary occasions occur. Why? This is so revolutionary. The Pope mentioning Nicolaus of Cusa and the coincidence of opposite as a conception, I mean, this is a revolution in thinking. I mean, I cannot exaggerate this in the time. It's fantastic. Why? Because it is a method of thinking which enables you to solve any conflict. The coincidence of opposite means that there is always, in no matter what field you are talking about, military, economic, political, cultural, scientific, always when there is a contradiction of supposedly contradictory, unsolvable problems, the human mind can always find the higher one as a method of thinking where all conflicts resolve. And when you train your mind sufficiently to think this way, to learn to think always from above, not from underneath, not from, trying like a maulwurf. I don't know the word. How do you call these animals who are living in the
Mole,
ground? A
mole, yeah.
mole, not like a mole where you're trying to dig your way up until you reach the top. No, you do it the opposite. You think always from above and you see the unity and the higher order, and then you can go into the nitty-gritties. It's a way of thinking. Now, this is very important because Nicolaus of Cues was a cardinal and he was the inventor of modern science. And, I just want to touch upon a couple of his concepts, which you absolutely have to study. We have some articles which you can read in our own literature as an entry point. For example, he was the author of the very concept of the sovereign nation state. Now, that is very important because the globalists or the empire faction, the oligarchy, they hate the national sovereign nation state because, they want to have supranational structures where an unelected oligarchy rules over the world. And, the emergence of the national sovereign state in the 15th century, caused by the ideas of Nicolaus of Cues, had a couple of absolutely revolutionary ideas. First of all, that you have to have a nation state based on sovereignty, because only if you have sovereignty that you have any participation of the individual in government. What you need for that is a representative system whereby the elected representatives have a reciprocal relationship to both the government and also the governed. And they have to represent both the interest of the governed to the government as well as the interest of the government to the governed in a reciprocal relationship. And, Nikolaus developed this, that this should be a council of the wisest. So it was really a system of meritocracy where it should be guaranteed that the government is devoted to the common good, because legitimacy in the government only comes from the consent of the governed. Now, this is an absolutely revolutionary idea, and all the countries who claim now that they are the democracies against the autocracies, if you look at that from the standpoint of Nikolaus of Kues and the notions he developed, these are not democracies, because they neither have the consent of the governed. If you have a support of maybe 20% of the population, you don't have the consent of the governed. You have a consent of a tiny minority. And also, there are no real reciprocal legal relationships. Now, yeah, there are many other conceptions I could go into. I think it is very important because we want to have a new international global security and development architecture and a new relations among nations. And there, the ideas of Nikolaus of Kues, in my view, and I'm very happy to debate that with you, are the most revolutionary and the most practical ideas how to organize a relation among nations based on the sovereignty of all. And very importantly, his idea that peace in the macrocosmos can only occur if all microcosms develop in the best possible way. Now, that means concretely that peace on earth can only happen if each nation state is allowed to develop its fullest potential and takes it as its self-interest to develop the other nation state to its full potential, and that only if they work together in such a way that you can have harmony in the world. And that is exactly, if you look at what the BRICS countries are trying to do, what the SCO countries are trying to do, what indeed Xi Jinping is proposing with his global governance initiative, I think these are absolutely similar ideas like those of Cusanus, and that's not a miracle because they go back to Confucius and his idea of harmony and development. And the fact that the Pope is now pushing Nikolaus of Kues against the Crusaders, this is a revolution. And I can only say, if you know anything about church history and the 2,000 years of history of the Vatican, this is the Pope coming out on the right side, because Nikolaus of Kues was attacked by the Aristotelian faction in the Catholic Church as a heretic. Even up to the present day, there are some currents in the church who try to tell you that Nikolaus of Kues was a heretic, while in reality he is the most revolutionary thinker. And if the Pope is now saying that, I can only say this is a big breakthrough. And if you don't agree with me, let's have it out in a discussion, because it is an amazing breakthrough, because it is the opposite of Aristotle. And the European history was the fight between Aristotle and Plato, and Cusa is, the continuation of Plato. One can really say on a higher level, because he made a major breakthrough. So Cusa also said that, in a famous letter called the Letter of Epiphany from 1454, that the sciences and the arts are the best gift to humanity born out of creative reason, and they are so precious for the development of everybody that whenever there is a artistic or scientific discovery made anywhere, it should be made available immediately to all other countries, not to hold back their development. So that is a revolutionary idea. It's the opposite of apartheid. It's the opposite of dual use technology and all of this gobbledygook, what is being talked about. And these are very practical ideas of how to build a new just world economic order. So, okay, I want to leave it at that because, the real discussion now comes how we can escalate our intervention to build an international youth movement, which I think is absolutely needed to implement these ideas. So I give the word back to you, Daniel. Yeah, starting off with that last point, I think that we will make available the outcome of a tribunal which was just conducted, I think, in Turkey by the Gaza Tribunal, where the leader is Richard Falk, and other participants were Chandra Mustafa from the Just organization in Malaysia, and many others. They came up with a finding, and we will make this available. So you should contact Daniel, who will provide all of you with that very important document. This is an answer to the person from Berlin, from Germany. So otherwise, I can only say, it is a moment in history of unbelievable danger and potential. I'm always vacillating between what is bigger. Is it the danger which is bigger, or is it the potential which is bigger? And it is absolutely impossible to make that decision, because what will the future be is not just an objective question, which is why historical materialism or dialectical materialism is not giving you an answer, because it is not in the objective forces. Even so, one must admit that they do play a certain role, like the economic breakdown is an objective historical fact which does play a role. But in moments like this, it is a very large extent the subjective factor of where society and mankind goes. And that's why I would urge all of you, in preparation for the Paris conference and what we want to accomplish in general, that you have to have a personal vision. You have to sit down at a quiet afternoon or a Sunday or whatever, and really think, think about your life, how old you are, what you have accomplished so far, how long you think you can live on, 100 years more or 80 years more, 120 years more, depending on your temperament. I think, a lot of it depends really on your determination, what you want to accomplish. And make a vision. What kind of a world do you want to leave when you are no longer here? What would you like to have done with your life, accomplished in cooperation with many other like-minded people, but especially what you have done? And the more beautiful the vision is you have, the more hope is that we can put humanity on a more positive trajectory. This is why I also, and I'm sure we will have a lot more discussion about that, the fact that the Pope, which after all is the head of a church which has more than 1 billion members, there are still people who are very religious and believe in what the church is saying. Not all of them are just nominal Christians without the meaning. I think this will have a bigger effect. I think if you have not studied Nicolaus of Cruz, you are probably tending to underestimate the significance of what it means that this Pope is saying that. Because what he said is that Cusa provided mankind with a philosophy of hope. so that you can see something which is not yet there, but will be there. And that is not a fantasy, that is not a fiction, it is something you can help to create. And, I have a very clear idea, what that is, because I have not only worked on the World Land Bridge and projects associated with that for a long time, but I also studied the method of Kusa's thinking of the coincidence of opposite. He has one beautiful writing which is called Divisione Dei, where he even speaks about that there is a wall um, which you have to transcend with your mind, and behind that wall is the coincidence of opposites. With other words, you have to make a mental jump to transcend that which prevents you from seeing the beauty of the coincidence of opposite. It's a very important pedagogical device, and it does require that you give up fact pushing or bureaucratic nominalist thinking. I mean, you have to really train your mind not to be stuck in the concretes, but that you develop this idea of the higher truth which is behind the wall of the coincidence of opposites. And once you start to think about that, you can envision mankind as a unity, as a beautiful, developed, creative species, which will have overcome war because we will reject war as a barbarian way of communication among each other, and we will grow out of it. So given the fact that you are of the young generation and you are the most affected, if we can realize this dream, this vision, I call upon you to do with us together everything you possibly can to realize that vision. So that is what we should be thinking about, and hopefully we see each other soon in one way or another.